Looks like we are live, everybody. How's it going? And welcome. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for Tommy Z for being here, and members of the Music Production Club for being here. We're going to have a fun time today talking about making music for brands. I'm going to send this link out to the Twitter right now, and we are open to the public. So, my name's Brian Funk. I'm an Ableton certified trainer, music producer, and all that jazz. And I have members of my music production club here to hang out with Tommy Z. And Tommy Z was on the Music Production Podcast talking about his company making music for brands and how he makes a living making music for brands. And it's an awesome story of I'd say like a leap of faith of leaving your day job as a banker and pursuing music and building a little empire of uh, people that are making music for commercials and brands, and it's really it's awesome. I love it. I'm so happy you're here. I want to just share my screen real quick just to show everybody um, your website real quick, making music for brands, which I think should be showing up now, where Tommy has all this great training, an excellent course. I mean, really in depth, taking you from the equipment you need to make music for brands, just to make music, to produce music, to making the connections and how the whole process of writing for commercials and for brands works. That's makingmusicforbrands.com. It's the course is great. I've seen quite a lot of it and learned quite a lot myself. Tommy, welcome aboard. Thanks for
Thank you,
taking the
man.
time to do this.
It's really good to be here once again with you. Always enjoy chatting with you. And thanks to you,
Likewise.
actually, I had one of my, the first round of students basically after that interview, because that thing wasn't even in existence. You know, I started doing interviews and seeing who might be interested in it. And then when people started coming over to me, I said, here's a curriculum, are you in? And then a lot of folks said yes, and so then I built it, and now it's alive. And yeah, we're getting more and more students every day. So I just want to thank you for sort of kickstarting that, because it really started with our conversation.
Well, the episode we had has been one of the more popular ones and gets quite a lot of feedback. There's a lot of people that are really interested in how they can start making music for companies. And you bring up such a great point in that episode and just in your kind of philosophy in general about how, the music industry has changed, and selling music is not what it used to be. And at the time when we were speaking, the main way people were making money was touring, and now here we are in an even more difficult situation where no one can tour right now. So
Yeah.
the work you're doing, and the fact that you're sharing those like kind of insider secrets with people on how to get their foot in the door and how to um, play on the same level as the professionals. It's a great service, and it's really important for people that are making music and artists in
I was
general.
inspired in a large part by you, because I've been following you ever since I like got my hands on Ableton. And there's not a lot of us who actually create music in Ableton for commercials. A lot of people are in Logic or Cubase, whatever.
Hmm.
So, um, so yeah, I have to say, I've told you even that probably some of your sound packs ended up in commercials. I couldn't tell you which
It's
ones, but
crazy.
but
Where
um,
these go.
but yeah, but I've always been fascinated by the online world and the ability to teach. And I also was looking for a project to inspire myself and motivate myself. Like a lot of people are thanking me like for putting this out there, but I'm also doing it for selfish reasons. I'm just doing it what I love doing. And
Hmm.
I found that after 15 years of making commercials, and I've done probably 1,000 campaigns, um, there are some fun projects, but sometimes you feel like, okay, I'm not really learning at this point. So how do I keep myself inspired and motivated? And I found that teaching other people my craft, which I feel very comfortable teaching because it is my life's work, it's giving me a lot of satisfaction, helping folks who are still sort of early on as far as their production and giving them tangible tips on how to improve their production, or finding folks who are like ripe, they're ready, like they've been sitting in their basement making crazy music, and they never for some reason thought about this being an outlet. So getting commissioned as a creative
Mm.
craftsperson on a freelance basis to create music. So I haven't seen anybody teaching this sort of stuff. And so I'm glad I'm the first, and I'm just trying to sort of, um, represent a high standard, I guess, that is representative of also my reputation in the business of
Mm.
making music for brands. I certainly want to pass on those high standards, and, you know, the um, the mindset, the work ethic, the way things are done. That's why a lot of people have said to me, this class is more than just like making music for brands. It's literally like a primer on just being like a pro, like being a professional, whether
Right.
you're a dentist or like whether you're a painter or a musician. And I think it's true. A large part of your success will depend on what's happening here and what's happening here in your heart. And um, the rest is just technique. The rest is just tips. The rest is just hacks that you can learn. But the most important thing that will keep you alive and thriving is really like, it's here. It's the mental game. It's your habits. It's your routines. It's how you structure your day, how you approach this craft, basically.
I think that's something we connect on a lot. This idea of like the mental game and the work of it, the just consistency, and just the way you think about things. And you do a lot of that in the course, which was something I enjoyed. And that's, I think, why we have such a good time talking with each other all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this is the stuff that I really geek out on, like the inner circuitry of the human being, the inner
Mm.
circuitry of an artisan. And it's not easy to make a career out of music. And I think everybody will identify with that.
Yeah.
And so it really takes a special kind of mindset, a special kind of approach to survive and to keep going, even when uh, you know there might not be signs of success or signs of progress. And that's the trick. Even when you make it, quote unquote, in our business, there's really no such thing, because you have to keep your edge constantly. Like, I'm sure Hollywood composers feel the same way. It doesn't matter how many films you've done. All that matters is this film in front of you. And many of them I've heard in the interviews basically talk about how much of a mental game it is to overcome your fear. Like Danny Elfman talked about this. He's like, I've done like 150, 200 films. And every time I open the session when a new film arrives, it seems as if I forgot what I'm doing. Like, it seems as
It's
if I have
crazy
to
to hear.
like, yeah, but it's very true. And so the mental game is so important. The routines, the rituals, the habits, because they keep you grounded. Because your career and your circumstances will be up and down. Like, you don't know what reality is going to throw at you on any given day. So this is how you kind of keep your North Star, your compass calibrated, and you don't panic. You don't panic when things get low. You don't go nuts when you get
Right,
an
right.
award or the things are going well, because you remember, like, tomorrow you're going to wake up and accolades don't mean much. You got to start from scratch, proving your value on everything that lands on your desk. So
Mm. Yeah, it's not the name, it's the work that people
that's right.
want.
That's right. Yeah, ultimately that's very true. I mean,
Well, you were going to give us some cool insight today. You've got a session you're going to show us for a Mitsubishi commercial you did, um, which I think is going to be a super fun look into. I mean, we're going to get our mental thing, but we're also going to get a very specific, practical side of this too. I want to encourage anyone on YouTube, if you have any questions, to put them in the chats. I'll be monitoring those to keep track of. As you can probably tell already by listening to Tommy, he's into sharing and he wants to help as much as he can. So he's very open to this. And same thing for us here in the Zoom meeting. Any questions you have, we can. put them in the chat. We chime in, and we'll get to them. And I'm sure some will come up because this is pretty exciting stuff. Are you good to go? You want to
I'm happy. Yeah,
jump
I'm
in?
good to go. Yeah, I'll
Awesome, man.
share my screen. Boom, share computer sounds. Okay, everybody seeing this session here?
Yep,
Yeah,
it's a beauty,
good. All right.
and it's a big one.
It's we were talking before. It's actually not that big this session. Um, and the thing I want to also tell you guys, I don't know if we were talking about this when we went live on YouTube, but my role within the industry is essentially as a music producer, which means I run a production company that delivers music to commercials and to brands, to advertising agencies. And so the role of a music producer in our business means something a little different than the role of a music producer in the music business, though not entirely. I can give the example of Rick Rubin. He's a music producer. Is he actually playing an instrument? Nobody really knows. Does he know how to lay down on the couch in the back of the studio? Yes. And maybe that's what we have in common. It's like we call ourselves music producers, and our job is essentially to lay on the couch in the back of the studio, not literally, it could be remotely, and basically supervise the creative process of a number of different freelance composers, which we also choose depending on the creative direction of the project. So that's essentially my role. Like an ad agency or a production company or a brand might come to me and say, here's a commercial. Here is the kind of feeling that we want. Here is the length of the commercial, and here is a rough edit. Normally we start composing to a rough edit, which means that it's a visual, it's a film very early on. It's not going to be like sometimes it's close to the final version, but sometimes it's like really early on in the visual editing stage. And so then I go off and I go, okay, which guys do I want to work with on this? Because I have freelance composers all over the world, who I've been basically befriending throughout my 15-year career in the business. And depending on what the direction is, I will reach out to these composers and say, hey, Jim, I got this thing. Let's get on the phone, chat about it. Let me send you the rough edit. You can take a look and we can chat. Hey, Asha, I have this thing. Let's talk about it. So basically, I'm like recruiting cooks for the kitchen for this particular menu. And once in a while, it happens that I will myself, because I don't even call myself a composer, but I have composed a few things in my time. I do a lot more music production, so overseeing the process and supervising it than I do composing, because that's what keeps the business healthy. If I'm sitting in a studio every day just making music, then I'm not out there trying to get more gigs, trying to get more projects. So I found that I'm effective in getting the projects and being sort of the person between the brand, the agency, and the world of songwriters, singers, composers, whoever I happen to recruit on a particular job. But I do love making music. I do love creating. I do love crafting sounds. And so sometimes a project comes along where I will decide to create a piece of music for it also, in addition to probably hiring someone else or commissioning someone else to throw another demo into the mix so that we have an option. So this Mitsubishi project happens to be one of those projects that I did recently where I actually composed the music. And that's why I'm going to share this, because obviously it's easier for me to talk about something that I did myself than something what another composer might have done. So before I show you the session, or let you even hear what's happening, I'm just going to give you a bit of a background on how these projects happen. So essentially, I will get wind of a project from one of my clients, somebody that I used to work with before, someone that I probably delivered music for before. In this particular case, the client happened to be Juice, which is an animation company. They also have a music division that is out of Wrocław, Poland. and they're doing work internationally. It's a really excellent company full of fine folks, and they do a lot of brand work, commercials, special effects, things like this. And so once in a while, I've collaborated with them, and it just so happened that this time around, they had this Mitsubishi commercial they were doing. I've worked with the director of this commercial on the previous project, which was an animated film, a 4-minute animated film about the history of Poland since the World War II, since the Second World War. And so when this project came along, he said, I really enjoyed working with you on the last thing, and here's another thing, and let's make something happen on this. So initially, before I even get to the creative, the first thing out of the way is, okay, what is to be done? What kind of budget do you have? This is what I have to get from the production company, so I can estimate my costs, like how many composers can I commission to create a demo? Can I afford a singer to do vocals, and so on and so forth? And obviously, when we decide upon the budget and the timeline, so the logistics of the project, the next thing we talk about is the creative. And so usually we'll get a brief. I will get a brief from the agency or from the brand or from the ad or from, in this case, the film director. And sometimes it's like a PDF that says, okay, here is the kind of feeling that I want. Here are some examples of songs or scores that I really like. And what I want to do is emulate the feeling that they give you, and sometimes it's actual, like sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's like a rough edit of the commercial, and the director saying, you know what, I have no idea how to interpret this thing musically. And so they rely on me or whoever they're working with to help them interpret how you could slice this pie. And so very often we might put up against this rough edit, like existing songs, and go, oh, you know what? This sort of like Bon Iver thing is really appropriate, or or I don't know, whatever. Doesn't matter. We try different things. Could be rock and roll. It could be trap. It could be classical music. You're just looking at different ways of interpreting a certain brief. And in this case, we didn't go through a lengthy process of doing that because the director knew what he wanted. He basically wanted like a hybrid electronic track that has some drama, that has some sophistication, that has some beauty in it. And so essentially, when I heard him talk about the feelings that he wants for this and the flavors, the ingredients, I said, you know what, this is up my alley. This is definitely something that I can do. So before I dive into the session and all the specifics of it and how I go about composing this step by step, I'm just going to play it for you guys so you guys see what this thing is about in the first place. All right, here we go. So that's what it was. Let me just stop this. So that's essentially what it was. You see, it's those flavors that I spoke about.
That's really great, man. I love your work. It's awesome.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's basically like you can see that it's a combination of things. It's kind of electronic. It's kind of cinematic. It's kind of like anthemic. it's got a bunch of flavors in there that basically seem to work with this picture as you're watching it and giving you the feelings that we intend to give you. And this is what I'm always talking about, like to people who I'm teaching this craft. It's not about your chord progression and bragging about how you did this in some weird, rare scale. It's not about your plugins. It's not about like any of those things that you have to explain verbally. You know, the success in our business is what happens when sounds come out of the speaker and combine with the visual. What are they doing to the person watching? That's all that matters. I don't care how you get there. I don't care if you have a laptop that's barely running. I don't care if you have an SSL console and a fully analog path. None of that matters. All that matters is what comes out of the speaker and what it does to the human being. And so I find myself having to repeat that because sometimes people just nerd out on like, oh, I use this chain or I use this hi-hat. And it's like, that's nice, but what we ultimately have to get to is the main aim, which is moving human beings on the other side of the screen and the speaker. So I also want to tell you that you might be hearing what you consider to be really cool or great, but I want to tell you that I've never finished music school. I don't even know what scale this damn composition is in. Like, I really don't. And I guarantee you that most of you guys, especially who are part of Brian's club, know more about Ableton than I would, like the shortcuts and like, you know, effective ways to do things. So I'm not trained, you know, I'm not all that proficient as a composer. But that's kind of how I got my gig, how I got my start in the industry is I basically sent over like a bunch of stuff that I was working on that I thought sounded really like it belonged in a commercial. And so people started saying, "Oh, you're making these really cool sounds. You know, why don't you try it on this gig? Why don't you try it on that gig?" So I kind of got into it, but I still don't consider myself to be as good of a composer as I am a music producer. So I'm just saying this to like give you folks encouragement that behind me isn't years of Berkeley or like I don't know all this musical theory knowledge. I have none of that. My gift, I suppose, lies in like, you know, I used to be a DJ in Toronto for like 10 years. And I still consider myself a DJ in a way, except I'm not mixing songs anymore. I'm mixing sounds, you know, instead of like separate songs, I'm just mixing tracks. I'm like, a lot of things you'll see here are presets. You know, I'm not one of those guys like Brian, who's gonna like spend 6 hours crafting a unique patch, which is beautiful and it's needed work, you know, definitely. But I don't get off on that. Like, what I get off on is throwing all these sounds into the session, like opening up a bunch of omnispheres, serums, opening up splice, looking for different sound palettes, and just seeing like which sounds are working together, which are the right ingredients that will make the right recipe for the emotion that we want to feel and for the sound that we want to get across. So yeah, that's as a word of encouragement that like I'm by no means a trained musician, and there are people who run circles around me in Ableton and even in composition. But so it is attainable. You just have to sort of focus on practicing the end goal, like not focusing on like you know, I spoke to one of my students recently, and he was saying to me, um, you know, I'm logging all the time that I spend on practicing different parts of music production. So I've logged like 140 hours in finger drumming. And then I've logged like 70 hours in learning synthesis. And I said to him, JP, that's all. And he's a chef. He's he's a 3-star Michelin chef, by the way. That's his like full-time job. So he's already like a real crafts guy, you know. But I said to him, JP, this is like practicing cutting of zucchini, getting really good at it, and then getting like addicted to the fact that you can cut zucchini really well. But at some point, you got to throw that zucchini into the friggin' dish and like bring it out into the dining room and watch somebody eat your stuff, you know? So I'm like, just don't get caught up in practicing the cutting of the zucchini too much. I don't know how to finger drum. I don't know chords. I don't know anything. But if somebody says you got 3 days to create a song that's going to give me goosebumps and it's got to work with this film, that's how I got my practice, like just being launched into that instead of like learning things bit by bit. So I encourage it as a thought. If it's kind of up your, if that resonates with you, if you're like, oh, I think that could work for me, then just like I literally tell my students, go on YouTube, download spots and practice to them, you know, just like get into that right away instead of like teaching yourself synthesis over 5 years. Just dive into trying to solve the big problem at hand. Don't share those spots with anybody because that would be a big no-no. But you can practice on them in private. Okay. That's something that I recommend. Okay, let's dive into the session. Unless there are questions, Brian, at this point,
I don't think so. I think
we can
this
keep
is
moving.
yeah, this is sounding great. I mean, I love the points you're making about not having to get so caught up in the technique and all these little things because you're really looking at the big picture is the emotional impact of the
That's right.
music with the
Yeah,
video. And
that's all
it's
that
it's
matters.
so easy to get caught up in our craft and think like,
Yeah.
we need to know how to cut zucchini really well, but you'd be better off knowing how to cook it and have it being poorly cut than have a great
Yeah.
cut zucchini and
Oh,
no
totally.
feel.
Totally. And that's the point I'm trying to make, right?
Mm.
So, as far as my workflow and what I teach normally, and this is actually literally from, it's one of the case studies from the master class, um, except I'm talking about it live instead of it being recorded. But let me tell you how the workflow happens as far as I go. And I also interview a lot of composers and like industry insiders, and it's pretty much the same for them. So this is how the workflow goes. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to receive this film, right? And normally, like I said, it's a rough edit. So it's like a very early version of the commercial. In fact, I scored this thing to an early version of this commercial. It didn't look so beautiful. And so the first thing I'm going to do is actually make the movie file size manageable. So I'm not going to bring in, like sometimes I get like 200, 300 megabits film file. And it's like, I'm not going to bog my Ableton down with that. So I'm just open it up in QuickTime and very quickly downgrade it to like whatever, 480p. It doesn't need to be high res at all. It doesn't need to be big at all, right? So that's the first thing I'm going to do is reduce the file size of the picture before I drag it into Ableton. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press play, even though I have nothing happening yet in the session. And I'm going to turn on my metronome. And I'm just going to watch the film. And I'm going to do that a few times. And as the metronome is running and as the film is running and I'm watching the film, I'm trying to picture in my mind what is the tempo that's going to allow me to create the musical emotion that I want. And I'm literally humming this crap in my, like to myself, just like the metronome's on, like, I'm like, you know what? That tempo 90 is not really working with the picture. Like the cuts are happening way too fast. We need a higher pace. So then I up it, let's say 120 BPM, right? And then I'm just watching if the metronome is actually falling, with a happy coincidence on some of the cuts. And I'm just humming to myself. I'm just like beatboxing to myself. I'm like, yeah, this feels like the right tempo. So when we talk about energy, for instance, here's one thing, like you think energy, okay, I need to do like 120, 130, 140, it needs to be fast. But sometimes when you're fast with BPM doesn't mean you're energetic at all. Sometimes in order to have like the weight of the track, like Godzilla, walking slowly, bang, 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 you need to have a slower tempo So you can make more stuff happen between the beats, if that makes any sense. So it has room to breathe and pulse, right? That was the case with this track. Like I ended up with 90, is this 91? I don't even know if that was the tempo of the track, because I actually exported all of the files out of my original session because it was a huge mess. I was telling Brian before the session started that I normally work in 2 sessions. So in the first session, I'm just screwing around trying to find the right flavors and the right ingredients and the right sounds. And then as that session grows, I only export the things that delight me and then start again in a second session where I start sequencing. So after I establish my tempo, the next thing I do, and this is huge, guys, like this is the thing that makes a lot of my students say, oh man, that was a game changer for me. It was a game changer for me when I first heard it. The reason why I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you is because it will make your workflow faster and more effective. And while as an amateur, you might have time to screw around with EQing a hi-hat for 2 weeks and then bragging about the signal chain that you use for this hi-hat. In our business, I literally have like 12 people waiting for the track to be presented tomorrow. 12 people, 4 people at the brand, 4 people at the agency, the film director, the film production company. Like imagine, it's not like releasing a track to 1 million people, but it's it's a lot of pressure, because a lot of money is riding on it. It's short time. And so we have to figure out ways to work really fast and effectively. And here's where it's something I learned from Quincy Jones. I call it the watercolor method. I don't know what the official name for it is. I just heard him talking about this. And he says, look, when you're working on compositions, and he was notorious for leaving things till the last minute, and then like racing against the clock to like create the composition before the band came in to record live. He said, when you're working on a composition, what you want to do is compare it to a painting. In a painting, what do you do first? You sketch an outline with chalk first, right? After you sketch the outline with chalk and you know what the shape of the thing is going to be, like sketching the house, it's going to have 2 floors or 1 floor, it's going to have a roof. Only after you have the chalk down do you start filling in the different sections with watercolors, right? You don't start with watercolors, you start with the structure, you start with the chalk. So watercolors to me represents emotion. That's your melodies, that's your chords, that's your main thrust of the track. And then lastly, in a painting, what do? You have the chalk, you have the watercolors, and then you have the oil. Notice how a lot of folks start with the oil. This is the twiddling of the hi-hat that I was talking about. You're twiddling left, twiddling right, working on like something that doesn't even represent the thrust of the track. Like it doesn't represent the main idea of the track. And sometimes we confuse that with progress because we're having fun. Well, look, in our business, like, because this is like, we're not doing this as a hobby, this is a business. Having fun is not the measure. Like being effective is the measure. If you're having fun on top of that, then you have the situation, solved. Then it's a beautiful life. But the key thing is to be effective. So oil is the last thing. What is oil? Oil is twiddling the hi-hat, twiddling with the hi-hat. Oil is building transitions. Oil is how much reverb are you going to put on that snare? Oil is maybe reverse the guitar on the last beat of the final measure or whatever. Oil is how wide are we going to pan some things, right? So you get the idea. Okay, so what does it mean in practice for me in Ableton? Basically, how I draw the house with chalk, how I draw the outline, is I create empty MIDI clips that run right underneath the film, and you see them here. They're colored differently and they're named differently, okay? So as I'm watching the film, I'm basically like, okay, let's see how long we need to do an intro for before something changes in the film. So I'm watching, okay, Here we have an overhead shot, so things are changing. So here we're in the garage with the family. Things are pretty intimate. We see a child. We want to have an easy intro. Basically, that's what's going to happen. So I just create an empty MIDI clip and I rename it to easy intro. Then I'm like, okay, the film director told me that he wants some kind of beat to come in here. And we see the first footage of the car. So I'm like, okay, so we know the beat's going to happen here. That's for sure. So I already marked that down. But then how do I transition between the intro and the beat? Probably going to need some kind of a transition here. So I'll literally mark it down with an empty MIDI clip. I have no music done yet, nothing, like not even a single instrument pulled up, okay, when I'm doing this. So then I'm like, okay, let's watch this film, see what happens, see what happens. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, as soon as the guy turns that knob, it's like the world changed. He turns on the knob, and now the cuts are quicker, it's going too much, obviously this is the high point of the track. So you see I'm building the architecture slowly, not musically, but conceptually. Here we introduce the listener to the beat. So we're going to lay down the fact that we've taken off. We're off to our road trip, but we're not going to give away everything yet. So we're going to start with gear 1. Then we're going to have some kind of a build-up here. Then we're definitely going to, this will be gear 4, gear 5, gear 6, whatever you want to call it. This is the high point of the track. And then the director told me it's very important for me here, when the girl is dancing in slow motion, to really drop all the energy and just put her out in space. So, okay, so I marked that with an empty MIDI clip. I watch it and I'm like, okay, how long should I keep this going? And I'm already thinking like, okay, musically, it makes sense to let this sequence run out. And the next natural like change that I can introduce without it feeling awkward is over here. Does that match up with the edit? Yeah, it does. It's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. Like, okay, and so here's going to be the outro, right? So all empty MIDI clips, all different colors. I just finished the chalk sequence. I know what the architecture of my house is going to be. So that's the first thing we do. And that prevents you from getting stuck in a damn loop and twiddling the hi-hat because you're overwhelmed. Like you're sitting over here and you're trying to figure out something cool, and this thing just keeps looping and you keep adding things, but you're not actually moving forward. You're stuck in this loop, right? So notice how this accelerates your approach, because now I don't have to figure out the track. I don't have to figure out the whole damn thing. All I need to do is click on this, click Control L, right? Which will automatically place a loop brace over this MIDI clip. And I just need to figure out the intro. That's it. That's my only concern right now. And I know what the parameters of the intro are. We're not in gear 1 yet. We're just in the garage. We're just introducing. We need a playful melody of some sort. We need some kind of an innocent feeling. We need some kind of a question mark, like where is this going? So not fully resolved, no rhythms yet, nothing like this, right? So then I just start on that. So I thought about, okay, I want to have a piano for sure, because piano is one of those really universal instruments that you know has a really wide application, right? But I don't like harsh piano. I don't like harsh pianos. I like these soft, spacey sort of piano sounds. So I started playing around with the melody, very simple melodies, right? Let me just take a look. And I recommend this piano to you guys, by the way. This is the free Spitfire Labs piano. So I don't think I did the chords first. I actually did the melody first. I don't play the keys, guys. So I probably couldn't even play this arpeggio um, at that speed. So what I normally do, because I have two left hands when it comes to playing stuff, is I'll reduce the BPM to the point where I can literally play something in with some kind of feeling where I feel comfortable with the pace, you know? So I laid that down first. So I'm like, okay, this piano is good. Normally I will just duplicate the instrument right away. I usually have like 3 or 4 instances of the same instrument. But what I will do is like do something else with that instrument. And that guarantees that you're going to have compatibility, like without having to look for the next preset or another instrument. Just take care of that first, like create a few layers of that instrument first. So then I did the chords. So I'm already like, wow, man, I got the intro solved. Like, this is it right here. That's the feeling, right? And I will literally leave it there. Like, I will go, okay, this is basically like, this is basically, it's got arms and legs. I'm going to come back to it later. But as far as like cooking analogy, we got the main things in place. We can move on, right? I will skip over the transition at this point because transitions to me are like icing on the cake. First, we need to bake the cake. And to me, it's more important in the hierarchy of importance to establish like what is the beat going to be and what is like gear 1 going to be, what is gear 4 going to be, then worry about the transition. So I literally move on to here next, right? I put on my metronome, I put on my loop brace, and we're off to the races, right? So let's take a look at what we got. Okay, let me go one by one here. Let's see if we have.
Can I jump in for a second, Tom?
Yeah, do it, do
Quick
it.
question. Brett kind of echoed what I was thinking too. Um, I notice a lot of the changes happen like off beats. There, it's not like at the eighth bar or the fourth bar all the time. And Brett was kind of asking this how often is syncing your ideas to the timeline of the vid a big challenge versus no big deal? And I was thinking a similar thing, like how do you deal with maybe like the musical timing not lining up with the visual timing of the video?
Yeah, I actually did an interview the other day with one of my friends and composers who shared a Mercedes-Benz case study, which we're gonna like put into as soon as I'm done editing that, because he showed his session too, and his example was like, if you think this is like an example of that, his was crazy. Um, like he was literally skipping over beats just to nail the cut on the downbeat, and he called it smuggling. When you smuggle in the downbeat before it's due, you know? So that happens all the time. It happens more often than not that the picture and the film director or the agency will say it's very important for us to hit this thing. And you're going to have to figure out how to make it happen. It's funny because, it's amazing how people don't notice half the time that you didn't finish like 8 bars or whatever, that it
Right.
came in on a seventh. And usually you accomplish that with uh, transitions. They sort of fool you. It's like, look at this thing over here. And next thing you know, the beat comes in and you don't realize that it wasn't even like on time. But I don't worry about any of that yet. And all I'm listening for when things don't line up for me on the timeline, like as far as, neatly, all I'm listening for is it a graceful entry? That's all I care about. Like, is it a graceful entry? I don't care if it's on like musically on time. I just need to know, like, was it awkward? And if it wasn't, then it's cool.
I've noticed that sometimes when songs I know are in films or commercials, that they will kind of like suddenly edit it in a different way to make it fit, and it's more noticeable there. But I guess if it's something like I'm not already familiar with and expecting to do a certain thing, it's easy to just kind of have that wool pulled over your eye with the little
Yeah,
magician distraction.
sure. And there's so many things going on. Like, this is what I love about making music for picture, is that this is a dance between, or not, this is a dance where there are two dancing partners, the picture and the sound. And I find it very difficult to make music without picture because I just don't know what it should be. Like simply put, you know. And so a lot of the music that I make, sometimes I'm lucky and I create something interesting, but a lot of times it suffers exactly from that, in that everything is measured. 8 beats, 4 bars, 8 bars, whatever. And like you're just sitting there and going, okay. Whereas film makes you switch things up and challenges you to actually keep things interesting and vary things and figure out how to make a twist and turn musical. And that's what I think music is about ultimately, is about change over time and surprise. Like all the great songs surprise us, when the chorus comes in, you're like, holy, I didn't see that coming. And then you end up singing it for the next 10 years. But it all started with a surprise. So I think the surprise is like really key for me. And what I teach a lot of my students when I get home, because I actually make them score these commercials. And a lot of times when they score this Mitsubishi ad, for example, they might start great. The intro might be alluring. It might be inviting. Great. Then we get into gear 1 and I'm like, I'm feeling it. And then when gear 4 comes in, I'm just like, it's a continuation of gear 1, like I'm losing you. I'm losing you. I know it's not a long time. It's like 60 seconds, but in such a short time, we have to come with a punchline. We have to do a few twists and turns. We have to surprise people. We have to delight people. So I always challenge people to get out of their comfort zone and like really try to surprise me in gear 4. And I had the same comment from the film director. Like initially, my gear 4 here was a kind of a continuation of gear 1. And he was like, man, I really need to feel the energy there. Like really, really take me somewhere else. And so I had to figure out, okay, man, like how do I go from this? Like it's hard to imagine how to go from this to like a gear 4 with tons of energy, like based on the DNA of this groove. You're like, well, how the hell is that going to happen? But then you start thinking and it's like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? The first thing that's going to make the biggest difference in the perception of energy is just altering the beat pattern. So whereas here we have this sort of R&B, here, drastic difference is I just go 4 on the floor. Totally change the beat pattern. Watch. See that? Like sudden, instant lift, instant feeling of moving forward. Whereas with this, you're sort of bobbing your head. Here, you're like literally moving your whole body, right? So, yeah, so that's gear 4. And there's a few other things that I did here. But just to let you know about gear 1, like how I'll go about doing it. I normally, if I know that a beat is an important part of the track, and here it definitely was. I don't know if my short keys or the fast keys, whatever they're called, will work while I'm sharing the screen in Zoom. I don't want to, just in case you're wondering like why I'm doing this manually. When I know a beat has to be present, I'll work on the beat first. So here, I think I did, here we have our kick. Some subs happening. Then we have some rolls, which are really, 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 really important in creating something interesting, as opposed to having just like this flat, sort of flat-footed beat. So these rolls, just stupid things like that. And you can see this is from Splice, actually. Graves, really cool stuff. Just, I'm just throwing stuff in like a DJ, like a chef, and just going, okay, this works here, this one works here. Then we have some snares, yeah. And then another loop from Splice, I think it was. Yeah, Fabian Mazur. And these are like the things you don't hear, but they definitely give you an energy. stupid things like this. So, but I'll get to these stupid little things that you don't hear. The main thing is like, okay, what is the good DNA of like gear one, of like setting off without like going into climax yet? Well, establishing the beat for sure. We're going to continue the melody of the piano, sure, but we need to start layering things. Things need to start evolving already. Intro was good, but now we need to step it up a notch. So let's see what I've done here. I'm a big fan, like I said, of duplicating your main instruments. Duplicate them and screw around with them. Like, look what I did with the piano here. That makes a huge difference to create interest, something interesting. Like, I just reversed the arpeggiator. You know how quick that is? You lay down the arpeggiator line, you duplicate the track, you reverse it. And together, look how it's, look what a layer of sophistication it adds. Okay, so that's something that I will do very often, is see how my main parts sound reversed together. Then what else do we have going on? These are the chords. What's happening here? Omnisphere ambient piano. I'll just keep adding layers of, you know, it might be the same piano even in different octaves. What's this? That's another one. So I knew, like, okay, I need a strong beat, I need a synth, and I need something that will give me like a feeling of higher class sophistication. So piano is good, but I was like, we definitely need strings. And I think I have some strings here. And strings give you that sense that, you know, like this is not a Toyota Corolla. Nothing against Toyota Corolla, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like you could imagine violins being in a Mercedes ad, but not necessarily in a Kia ad. It just gives you that extra level of sophistication. So this is how I'm creating that feeling of drama. And this certainly sounds dramatic, like by itself. It's like, wow, I didn't even realize that's what it sounded like. But it's never acting alone. It's in the context of the rest of the, with the rest of the recipe, right? In that sense, you can barely hear it, those things. So yeah, so then as far as like my workflow, I move on to the most important thing. Look, I named this thing Let's Go, because that's where, you know, I really needed to amp up the energy here. So I thought about it first. I'm like, how can I do this? How can I do this? Because I kind of had the same beat happening here. And I'm like, I just couldn't get to another level of energy with that same beat. So that's when I had this idea of like just switching up the beat altogether. And this is, I think, Splice again. And I've used this beat on like 3 different campaigns, believe it or not. You'll probably find this on Splice. But some might ask, well, why are you using that? Like, why are you using like, you know, this exact sample instead of making your own? For anything that isn't unique or like, you know, really distinct in some way, it's just faster for me to use this than create a beat exactly like this. So if I have a loop that is already like answering my need, I'm just going to go with that, you know. But if I'm creating something, if I need something unique, I'm probably not going to take some lead chord progression or melody from Splice. Okay. But I am going to use hi-hats. I am going to use beats, snares, loops, rolls. I'm going to use all those things. So the beat made a big difference in taking this to another level of energy. And the second thing is I thought, whereas here we have things kind of going, they're kind of smooth. They're introducing the drama. Here we needed to get like really, you know, a little more intense. So I'm like, I'm going to add a really gritty bass. serum. You can actually see it above. You still have the nothing fancy. I don't even like the way it sounds, to be honest, by itself. But within the mix, it sounds great. Here we continue with melody. You see things are getting a lot more intense, right? And you can hear it's all side chained because it's very important for the beat to come through. So anything that's thick, like if I want energy from an instrument like a bass or like that synth you just heard, that Omnisphere synth, I'm definitely going to sidechain it. I'm not always going to sidechain it to pump, like to pump really audibly. It's just to make sure that the hit, the kick is going to come through, that the beat has room to establish that energy, and that those synths that are really heavy and thick don't disrupt the kick. And then we heard lower strings here. Let me see. Yeah, we heard lower strings here. So then I'm like, I'm gonna raise the strings up an octave here to make it more dramatic. And you hear it's like side compressed pretty heavily. I'm not going to worry about the rolls. You've heard the beat. One thing I like to do is instead of crashes, I'm going to use claps with like huge reverb trail. I just find it more effective as far as marking the beginning of like a new section. Check it out in context. And apart from that, looks like we have some cashmere stuff. Just a little thing. Yeah. So when I had that beat, when I had that bass line going, and especially this thing, which really made the difference, I think. Where are you? Is this? No, this is the high strings. This thing, I didn't even export it into audio. So all those things add like that Gear 4 energy, because it's like, you know, it's these like really intense sounding synths that are arpeggiated. They give you a sense of pace, right? But in addition to the bass lines and the beats. So yeah, once I was happy with that, I move on. Spacewalk sequence. Okay, we just got to make it feel like it's out in space. So those will be the piano parts that I actually came up with very early on, even for the intro. And I just reused them here. And notice how if you're building this like Lego blocks, you know, you're trying to make your structure interesting. I get to repeat parts that you already heard here because I took you somewhere completely different over here. So it's like we started our journey at home in the garage, and now we're coming back home. I see a lot of composers making this mistake that the loop or the sequence they open with is the thing that I'm hearing all throughout. And unfortunately, by the 30th second, I'm just like, you know, there's infinite possibilities to give people goosebumps. And sometimes we just get stuck because we get so comfortable with how well this thing is working, you know? So we just keep like duplicating it forward and forward. But it's very important to vary your composition. By the time I got to this point, it's like smooth sailing because this is all easy stuff. I'm basically bringing back parts that already happened in the spot, and we're just coming to an end. And one of the comments that the film director had is, give me the feeling that this spot is ending, but at the same time, the adventure begins. It was something like that, like that it's not over yet, you know? And so I'm like, well, how do we do this? And so I decided to just take this from gear 4, bring it back here. But filter it and bring it back up. That's what kind of creates this cool ending. Okay, so once I'm done with those main parts, the last thing for me is usually the most fun, which is like coming in here and like going, okay, how am I going to go from the intro to the beat? And here I'm just playing around with, you can see here how I spell piano, piano, but just taking little things, reversing them, adding verb to them to create these ramps. It's very important. Like I always tell my students, it's so key. When you establish something like first gear, by like the third second of something new coming in, already give me the feeling that even that's going to change. And always be leading people to believe that there's a change coming. I mean, nothing does this better than like buildups in electronic music. Like basically, you know that the end of the world is coming. Like you just don't know what it's gonna be, but it's probably gonna be satisfying as hell. So you can do that in little ways in your compositions by constantly having these risers and ramps. And I have all sorts of these things. And they basically let the listener know that things are constantly fluctuating, that things are about to change. And that's how I bring in changes. These little reverse things. What's this thing? Chords reverse. Yeah, you see, these are existing elements I recycled. This is literally the chord, which I just highlighted and clicked R in Ableton, reversed, boom. What else is here? These little things. You can barely notice them in the composition, but believe me, they make you feel like something else is coming. Notice something. As you get comfortable with gear 1, you're already starting to hear a drum fill that's panning left and right. That's telling you we're going to change again. And so again, like a bunch of stuff. I think this is from Splice. Look where it starts. It starts like halfway down gear 1. Always creating a sense of expectation with the listener. Like, don't get used to this. We're going to switch it up again. Don't get used. And, you know, time spans are getting shorter and shorter. I don't know if you guys Googled like these stats that Spotify is working on. You know, they know the listening preferences of people better than anybody. People are switching like after split seconds of listening to the opening of a track. So it's really important to keep people on their toes. So notice how things get louder here. This is oil. This is when I go in and I start drawing automation ramps, start looking for transitions, start looking for all these glue, these pieces of glue that will glue these sections together. And that's oil for me. The other thing that I do as a part of the oil stage is I'll probably go in and make sure there's an EQ on all like heavy sounding stuff, roll off lows on anything that doesn't have to do with lows. So, you know, I don't want anything interfering with the beat. What else? I normally put a limiter channel very early on, just a limiter, just a limiter on my master channel. Sorry, very early on, so that I can work really loud and that the limiter starts squishing things for me, and I can just like balance everything while the limiter is taking care of things, not clipping, like not distorting digitally, if that makes any sense. By the way, I'm not trained as an engineer or anything like that, so I'm probably being sacrilegious, according to some engineers, but that's just the way I do it. I make sure that the limiter is not being hit in the red by the entire mix too much, so that it doesn't flatten it out, so that I don't lose the the dynamics and all that stuff. But yeah, that's one of the first things that I do, and I don't have like a fancy mix master channel. Like normally, it's just a limiter. Like this is an Ableton limiter that's just sitting here. I worry about the intensity of the sounds while I'm working on the spot and like putting sound to sound. I'm like, okay, you should be louder, you should be quieter. Ah, you're not intense enough. Maybe what I'll do is things like, um, for example, this wider plugin. I don't know if you guys know it. It's free. It's really cool, man. You just put it on the channel and you can spread your stuff wide if you like. I use a fair bit of Ableton compression, multi-bands. Sometimes I even use this guy, the OTT, which makes things really intense. But you got to be careful with that because that's like salting. Salt is good in a dish, but if you over salt, then you lose everything. So you got to be really careful with that. Let me see what other notes I made about the things that I do. Um, Sometimes when I get homework from people and they show me their tracks, one thing I find is that their sounds are not interesting enough. They're just flat sounding. So I always recommend like, um, try a bit of saturation, try a bit of distortion, try a bit of spring verb. Just just give things some kind of a character, don't just give me like a guitar recorded, like give me some layers behind it, make it sound interesting. um what else do I have here? Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much like, you're getting the gist of my process and the operation. So I think this is a good time probably to open it up to questions so that I actually address what you guys want to know.
Cool. That was incredible and super helpful. I love the way you work in sections and you kind of like make decisions of what's going to happen, what's the energy level going to be here. And I think that's something we can do even if we're writing our own songs. If we have a verse, a chorus, a pre-chorus, we can really map that out and have the plan. Um, I well, let me actually. Paul had a question. Paul was saying, it seems like you like to print a lot of the effects to audio. That seems to be like a big part of your workflow. Is that to help you focus on the structure rather than the sound design? So you're kind of like committing, or is there another reason, or something maybe we didn't
Yeah,
get?
it's partly got to do with commitment and like not losing my head, because I have all these MIDI tracks and all these like automations and things like that. So at a point when I'm happy with the way something is sounding, like let's say an effect automated, I like to print that in case something screws up,
Mm.
in case something screws up. But it's also like, so I don't have to think about it anymore. And this is why very often, like my sandbox, which is where I collect sounds and inspiration, where I just play around, I'm just free, there's no structure yet, is different from the session where I'm like, okay, now it's time to actually put this thing together. So I don't always do it that way, where like I have two sessions, but very often it ends up that way, and that's only like just to commit and just have it as. And I like working with audio files actually, because there's no glitches, there's no like, um yeah, especially glitches with automation, or the MIDI is not firing at the right time, or I had Omnisphere patches disappear on me when my session crashes, and now I log back in and I lost the sound. I don't even know what it was. So I
Mm.
try to just print stuff as soon as possible.
Yeah, and then you get some fun things you can do with audio that you can't really do with MIDI. Like you can reverse it, like you said. You can time
Yeah.
stretch it. You can
I'm not a big
repick.
fan of MIDI, like maybe this goes back to the days when we had like MIDI interfaces and it took you like an hour to figure out why something doesn't work, and then you have to go home. Like,
Right.
so, I'm just like all about effectiveness and like just getting a track out as soon as possible and not worrying about anything. So whatever can speed up my workflow and not get in the way of my inspiration is key, because I got a really short fuse, you know? Like I got really and I mean that in like not in a temper way, but like I just get excited, and then if I don't actually evolve my track in a meaningful way, I go home like tense and angry because I spent all this time in a loop and I don't feel as if I solved anything yet. So,
Right.
in order to gain a few years of my life expectancy back, because the jobs are stressful enough already, I just find like the more I move things forward and commit instead of like leaving things up in the air, the better I feel because I can progress quicker.
I think that's a great idea because, like you said about like tweaking the hi hats, if you have it in MIDI, you can change it forever, and it's very easy to always say, "Well, I'll just go back and fix that," or "I'll change this." But once it's audio, you're kind of like, "Okay, now I got to the next thing has to work with the thing I already committed to."
Yeah, and if you like the way something sounds, print it and move on. It's like, um, I mean, it goes to a deeper thing, which I talk about with artists. Even like, how do you know when something is done? And in a way, it's never done. You could work on a song until the end of time, and you will never be satisfied fully with it. And that has a lot to do with the fact that you are different on Monday than you are on Thursday, than you are next year on Monday.
Right.
And I know everyone's going to identify with this, what I'm about to say, which is you listen to a track on your hard drive that you've done a while back and you go, man, that is actually decent. Like, wow, you almost surprised by yourself. Like, you surprise yourself and you start like remembering the time when you actually jammed on it. And if you were to go back in time, you'd realize that like 2 weeks after jamming on that thing, you probably weren't all that delighted with it. But like when you uncover it a year later, you have a totally different relationship with it. So it's the same for me in music. Like when I evaluate things on Monday, I'm like, oh my God, I should be a full-time composer. This is amazing. And like Wednesday, I wake up and I'm like, man, no, I'm not ready. I'm just gonna stick to producing. Um, so I found that about myself is that we judge music differently, depending on when we listen to it. So the blessing of making music for brands is there's no time to think about things. Like you you have to deliver in 2 days. So you're like, you're like a you're like a Navy SEAL, you know. You're going in there, it's dark. You don't know where the enemy's lurking. Your senses are sharpened. Uh and you're just trying to execute quickly and get the hell out of there, man. That's making music for brands.
That's a great point.
I have a question. I was just
What?
wondering, does making music for brands affect your personal stuff or your personal creations?
Um, I would say yeah, in two ways, which are opposite of each other. One is that at the end of a long day where I'm making music for somebody and I might not feel as if it's something that I really enjoy working on, I find myself really, really, even though I've been making music all day, I literally enjoy like starting a new session and just doing something to like vent, to like just have a bit of fun before I go home on something that is truly my own. That's the positive way. The negative way you could say is that very often at the end of a long day of like listening to stuff and getting demos out the door, I'm really not a lot of times I'm not in a position like physically even to like attempt something of my own. And so that's more of like the negative side of it. You know, when you make music into your full-time career, um, that's the minus of it, is that you're always looking at it from an angle of like your profession. So sometimes I even feel guilty, like for, you know, making music that is not intended for a commercial or something like this, even though it's a ludicrous feeling. Obviously it's absurd, but because I support my family doing this, do you know what I mean? It's almost like you almost have this feeling like you shouldn't just do it for enjoyment's sake. um I don't think that's right, and I don't think that I don't think that should be the case. And so I try to give myself these moments where I schedule just creating music, for the fun of it, you know. So but I can tell you that making music for brands really changed me into a true craftsperson. I would not be sharing this session with you had it not been for my involvement in that industry, because I learned Ableton because I had to create a song in 2 days. I learned everything I had to learn in order to create these pieces for these commercials. And so it made me a much better craftsman. I don't know if I would ever I don't know if I would be as effective in learning and actually being productive with my music when I wasn't, if I wasn't commissioned to create these projects. In fact, 10 years ago, I quit doing ads for like a year. Um, I basically fell in love with a girl in Europe. I had a studio in Toronto, which I was a partner in, and I sold my shares and I just left and I, you know, moved to Europe, spent a year traveling Europe with now my wife. We got kids, we got a family. But it was during that year that I said to myself, I'm going to make an album this year. I'm fine. Like, I'm just going to be an artist. I'm not going to be some commissioned guy working for brands. And I got to tell you, man, recording that album like was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And I'm not sure I always enjoyed it. Like, I just struggled so much with knowing what to do and limiting all the options. Notice how all these projects limit your options immediately, which is great. It's like, well, this film is only going to work with certain kinds of music and certain kinds of tempo. And so you're like already off to the races. Like a lot of things are answered for you. Whereas I found like trying to create music, you know, for music's sake, man, that was very difficult because it was as if I was a Navy SEAL sent out on a mission to bring something back, but the general wasn't really sure what I'm supposed to look for or what to bring back. And so I went out there and like I, you know, walked around these dark buildings for months, and I wasn't sure what I was looking for, and that's what made it difficult. So that's a long way to answer your question.
That's a great point, though, that having that direction and having that mission to go with your Navy SEALs metaphor,
Yeah.
it's so important. Even for me, when I played in bands, I was writing for the band. So, like you said, so many decisions were made. Okay, we've got a bass player, guitarist, and a drummer, and three vocalists.
Yeah.
Go. Now, when it's just you, it's sometimes you can do anything, which is super fun and freeing. But a lot of times, you just you're just searching and you're just going and you're just going and um,
You know, when I'm jamming by myself, I'm just like, it's easy to just play, you know, and just have fun and just create a patch and create some kind of a thing. And just, it's almost like I do it for therapy. I don't put pressure on myself to finish anything. I just enjoy myself with my Moog or with a pedal, just
yeah.
playing, just having fun, you know. And yeah, as soon as I start putting pressure on myself to release something, that's when it all goes weird.
You know, especially in these last few months, being home all the time, not being able to play out or go out or do much of anything. It has been a lot of fun to just do music for the sake of doing music without any of these goals or missions or finishing things. Um, I think I've like kind of drifted from that a little bit over the last few years of my life, where I'm always trying to finish something, move forward, get something done. Where sometimes just the joy of playing music, strumming your guitar and letting it just go off into the ether and it doesn't even get recorded, and it was just that one moment. Um, it's kind of taken me back to being a kid when I was first getting into music, and the point of doing it was to just do it, not to have a product or something at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I have to be very careful not to let my work affect that, you know.
Hmm.
When music becomes your job, it's like it's very important to hold on to that innocence and that freedom, and freedom from fear, freedom from pressure, because that's when your music starts sucking, you know, when you when you're trying to like make it do what you want. Like that's not, you know, the best moments in music have always been when music went, I'm going to do this to you right now. You know, that's the moments that I look for. Like when I find the right sound and I just play this melody and I'm like, no, not this key, this key. Oh, wow. That moment. Like when you just realize that, you know, everything is coming together beautifully and music surprises you. That's always been like my favorite moment. And maybe some of you identify with it. When things are going well for me, I stand up. That's how you know things are going well. I literally stand up. Um, and a lot of people do, but those are the magic moments, you know. I'm reminded what this, maybe I shared this in an interview with you when we spoke, but it was some engineer who's renowned, famous, recording studio engineer, who said, you know, I never realized how broke I was because I was having so much fun. So the man was in the studio from early morning to probably early morning working on records. So it's like, in a way, that was very refreshing to hear, because that's a definition of success. Like
Hmm.
he spent his whole time having fun. Like you forget to eat, so you don't have to buy food. You're having you know, incredible sessions, so you don't go to sleep. Um, you know, it's like your needs are very minimal when you're happy.
Mhm.
When you're a happy person, your needs are minimal. And so we got to watch out, you know, when there's some kind of like this insatiable restlessness within us, because then we are prone to do something silly or boring.
Mm.
Hey, I have a question, Tommy.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question about mentorship. So I'm a little bit like you in that I used to work high paying jobs in offices for large companies. And I walked away from all of that because I never cared at all. And I'm focused on building a career for myself in music right now. I'm in a deep learning phase. And a lot of my learning, a lot of everyone's learning right now is done online. And a big piece that I've noticed is missing is, you know, how do I seek out mentorship in this type of work and the type of work that you do? With all the learning being online, I'd imagine in the past when people went to real classrooms and interned in real studios, that was a little easier to come by. Do you have any advice for finding a mentor?
Um, it's like hard for me to give you this advice without pitching my own thing, which does exactly that, you know.
That's okay. Go for it. That's an opportunity for you to give us a pitch.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff online um, that talks about music production. There's a few things online that talk about the music business, as in like how to sell your singles, how to promote your singles. But like I said, I haven't seen anything that actually teaches people in a practical way the ins and outs of being a commissioned musical craftsperson that works for one of the last places that's ever going to hire anybody. These are brands. Like, this is why I always say that back in the day, Bach, Handel, Mozart, they lived their whole life as musicians. How? When there was no record industry, when music wasn't being sold, because patrons hired them, commissioned them to create music. Well, that's what we have today. Like, music is free. So who's paying for music? Brands are paying for music. So that was kind of like my vision. It's like, well, what are all these like studio musicians going to do? Who are they going to work for? Making music for brands is not the only way to make money. There's a variety of ways to make money, but it's just the world that I know and that many musicians that are my friends, that's how they make their living. So, so I created this resource, and like everyone who's a part of my class, they know, like whoever sends me homework, they know I reply. I don't do email. I literally record myself listening to your music. And just like you saw me today going through the session, expressing my feedback, telling you where you can improve. And I take it as far, I should probably charge more based on the amount of time I spend with those who actually take advantage of it. Luckily, it's only a small percentage of all the people that enroll in my masterclass that really take me up on that. So I don't know if others are just being quiet or they prefer to work on their own, but the invitation, the offer that I extend, or the thing that I say to everybody is like, when you get into this thing, I'm literally going to give you feedback on your stuff. And another thing that I've started doing with some of the students that are really, really talented, and I can see that they belong in the business, they just never knew about it, is I mentor them around being a music producer also. So, we talk about opportunities of, like, for instance, representing my business where they are, where I'm not. Could be Latin America, it could be Germany. Like, I'm not there physically, but they are. The thing that they are missing is the credentials. They don't have the real. They have the talent, they have the ability to forge relationships. They just couldn't email anybody with a link to their site because they don't have anything. So those are also the things that I'm working on, which I never really planned at the outset. But as I started getting in touch with all these really talented people, like high caliber guys and girls who are coming through the masterclass, I was like, selfishly, I'm like, how do I put these guys to use? And so we'll see what comes out of it. But I'm already starting to like do that with some of my students, where I'm sending them out into the world and saying, okay, this week you're going to do this. You're going to email these ad agencies. You're going to ask for a meeting. And they're like, I'm like, just do it. You got my reel behind you. Don't worry. Everything's going to be great. Which is like how, I started. Like, I was like, in the beginning, and my mentor said, just go, smile, shake hands. You're going to do well. Just be yourself. And when the job comes in, we'll help you out. So that's what I'm doing now. That's exactly what I'm saying. Go out there, show the reel, ask for a meeting. If you get a project, we'll make it happen. You can watch, you can stand in the kitchen, you can watch. Which composers do we pick? How does it get produced? But the most valuable thing that anyone can do if they're capable, because there are different kinds of musicians. There are musicians who are just studio musicians. Like, they do not get energy from having a meeting, from emailing people, from being a producer. They just want to be in the studio playing the guitar, playing the piano. But then you have different kinds of musicians like me who need a little bit of all of that. Like, I just can't be in the studio 8 hours a day. I'm not planning to be Danny Elfman. I need, it's more like I like the profile of a Pharrell. He might sing a little, he might do a little beat here, he might, I don't know, do something else over here. That's kind of how I like the variety. So anyway, your question was about mentorship. Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't see any resources that relate specifically to my industry online. And if I did, I might not do what I did. because, you know, if I saw something out there that was really great, I probably wouldn't go through the months of putting this thing together. You know, it's like 37 hours of content plus all the mentorship that I do when people send me their work. So feel
That's
free,
great.
Brett,
Thank you.
to email me. Feel free to email me if you have questions. Like, people who email me who are not my students, who are inquiring, they also know I answer every reasonable question. I don't answer like absurd emails. I don't answer hate mails. I don't answer um, just emails from people who don't seem like I'd even want to like bring them close to my industry, you know? I mean, it would reflect badly on me. But anybody who has goodwill, and you might not even be ready to sign up for the masterclass, but you have some questions and you're a decent human being and you're doing some good stuff, I will always answer.
I appreciate that. I'll follow up with you, and I promise not to send you hate mail.
Brett, if I could add to that too, I think the points Tommy make is spot on. And I'm a teacher. I teach at Berkeley. I teach at high school. I put stuff online, YouTube tutorials, you know, all this stuff that I do. And the percentage of people that say in the classes I teach that actually reach out and form some sort of relationship, that email, that comment back, that respond to whatever I give is very low. It's kind of like in a real life class. If you were taking a college course, stick around after the class and say hi to the professor and ask a question. Um, just it could be anything. And you actually kind of did this yourself with me a little bit in offering to play some of my music on your radio show. um, I think that's a great approach, like thinking of like what you can offer. Like Tommy said, if you're in a different part of the world he can't be into, that could be like kind of a selling point that you have to think like, you know, how can you help in a way. But just commenting, responding, adding your thoughts to the discussions that you find online. For, you know, if I put out a YouTube video, the percentage of like comments to views is really tiny, and sometimes it's nothing. And I see all that stuff, and I get the emails. And for all the people that download a pack off of me, I hear from very few of them. And once in a while, someone will tell me they put the sound in their song, and I'm so thrilled to hear it. I'll share that. I'll put it out there. And I'm listening to your music now. Um, I think that it's kind of the same as in real life, the online way too, is you know, like a guy like Tommy is doing what he does because he loves it and he's having a lot of fun doing it. So he's excited to hear from people. He's spent all this time putting this course together and all these materials. A lot of times when we make stuff, I know as a musician, you know, you put out a song and then you release it, and half the times it's like crickets. You don't hear anything. Or if I put out a pack and it's like, what happened? You know, I just worked on that and like I don't hear anything. Um, it's great for to hear, to to see what people have to say. So I think just being part of those conversations that are happening online, the people that you are interested in learning from, to just reach out to them. They're usually a lot more accessible than I've ever expected them to be. And you know, for even for like doing the podcast, I've gone on a limb and just sent cold emails to people, and you know, next thing I know, I have like someone I can't believe I'm getting a chance to talk to, just by asking and reaching out. And it's for me, I have people that come into my classes that I never interact with. I have high school students that never say a word to me the whole year. I have people that come in the Berkeley class where they just turn in their assignments, and it's all like one way. I don't hear from. And then there's others that I stay in contact with, that relationships form. But that percentage is very low. So I
That's
think that's
life.
something you can take advantage of. Yeah.
That's the world, basically.
Mhm.
You know, you always have a small percentage of the cream,
Yeah.
and that's the way it's always going to be. And but you're very right about it's this attitude of like, my most successful students are people who, I'll give you one example. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't know if he'd want me to, but He's a gigging musician, so he relied on gigs, live gigs. All of that got killed with this situation. He spent whatever savings he had, probably not his last savings, because he doesn't look like one of those irresponsible people. He's a pretty smart guy. But obviously, if I'm not having any income, like it's going to take a lot for me to like spend a significant part of it on something. But he did that to enroll. And he said, I'm going to treat this as my job. He literally like went through 37 hours of content, 7 modules in like a couple of weeks. He sent me homework, like, you know, everything quickly. As soon as I gave him feedback, he would work on revisions to it. And he literally said, like, I just decided I'm going to treat this like a job. And you know what that does? Like, in addition to the quality of his music, but it's the whole package. Like, he's making good music. He's keen. He's like super proactive. I'm just like, man, how do I get this guy into my orbit before my competition does? You see? So it's like human beings who are like delightful and remarkable, they're rare, you know? I'm sorry to say that. I think every human being is special. And it pains me that some human beings are operating like at a sleepwalking level. Yeah, it just pains me. It's sad because everybody, every single human being on earth has the capacity to wake the hell up, to paint a vision of what life could be, to identify the things that give you energy, that you want to be closer to, that you want to spend your time with, and just commit to being one of the best at it. It's not about external success or rewards or awards. It's just about going to bed at night saying, man, I definitely squeezed the shit out of everything this day had on my way to that. So that like when my kids see me working, when I have to look myself in the mirror, you know, it's like I didn't waste an opportunity. A lot of people who email me, for instance, it's like, I don't know what's going on with this world. And I feel really bad about the fact that this happens. But it's this sense of like, tell me what to do, or help me out, or listen to my single, help me out, please. And it's like, do you realize, like, if you want to, like, these people have no chance. I don't care if you email 1,000 people every day and you go to bed going, I'm really hardworking because I send out 1,000 emails saying, please help me out. That's not how you achieve any meaningful progress in any meaningful thing. Like, it's not. You know, you gotta offer yourself as somebody who's going to be useful, who's going to say, how can I help you? Or I really appreciate your time. Like, I'm really delighted by the amount of people who don't get into my masterclass, but they send me an email like, really appreciate this content you've put out. And it kind of weirds me out because I'm like, well, I'm putting this content out to promote the masterclass. It's not like I'm doing it so like selflessly. But a lot of people like thank me for putting this content out, you know? Whereas for me, it's just like, okay, well, I'm going to obviously show you what it's all about so that you know. But I'm like, wow, that's really nice. So you get all kinds, you know? I don't want to go on a sermon here, but like the best thing you can do for yourself is realize there's no white knight on shining armor coming to save you. I got my own problems. Brett's got his own problems. David's got his own problems. Luke has his own problems. Brian Funk has problems. We all got problems we got to get through. So if you want a door to open to a new place, to a new relationship, email people with that appreciation and understanding that we're probably busy, that we probably appreciate a kind word, And that's hell. That's going to make a hell of a difference. The kind word, short, kind word, appreciation. And instead of just asking for somebody's time or for someone to do something for you, see what it is that you can do for them. Like, how can you be of value? You know, you might not be musically skilled, but what if you were like, hey, I know my way around building websites, or I know my way around programming synth patches, or I know my way around reaching out to people, forming relationships. That's how you get in. Just find your thing you can already do really well. And yeah, and having a mentor is huge. Like, I can't overstate that enough. Having a mentor is huge. If I didn't have a mentor, I don't know what I would do in the beginning, you know? So it's very important. And you'd be surprised, like Brian said, how many people you'll reach out to that will actually reply to you, as long as you do it in a like, you know, a smart, meaningful way. Yeah.
You have to be the knight in white shining armor yourself, for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. And it's going to feel much better when you look in the mirror, because you develop strength. Everything that you have to do on your own makes you stronger, makes you more skilled. I don't know how many times when I used to work at music production companies and we were interviewing engineers or potential music producers, and they're like, well, I'm not really about selling. I'm not a sales guy. You know, I just want to sit in the studio and twiddle knobs. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you something. You may like selling, you may not like selling, but the best thing you can do for yourself as an engineer is learn how to sell. Like, what do you mean? What does selling have to do with engineering? I'm like, what? Look how many engineers are out of the job today. What are the smart ones doing? They're starting YouTube channels. They're setting up online products, classes. They're trying to be of value. You have to be able to sell. But before you sell, you actually have to have something to sell. You have to be a person of substance. You have to be somebody who has something to offer. Otherwise, you know, there's not much that you can sell, you know? So, but still, that doesn't, I mean, there's a lot of 22-year-olds that got their jobs and eventually careers in our business. And I interview some of them in my masterclass where, how did they get in? They got in by saying, I'll, you know, bring the coffee. I'll clean the studio. I'll do the dirty work. That's how they got in. There's a girl called Genevieve, who's what's her last name? I can't remember, but I just interviewed her last week. She's doing commercials. She went to Berkeley. And she does films also. And when she decided that she wants to focus on film, she was already like an executive producer at all these like really great music production companies in New York and LA. And when she decided she wanted to do film, you know what she did? She started asking composers if she could be their assistant. After being an executive producer, she was ready to be an assistant. So some composer gave her a job to be an assistant. She ended up basically installing sound panels on his wall. That was her job. Like month before, high heels, executive producer working on huge advertising commercials. She wants to be a film composer. What does she do? She lowers herself. She humbles herself. She's like, as long as I'm around, credible, good film composer, I don't care what it is. She learned how to use she was telling me, she goes, I got two left hands. I have no idea how to use a drill. She learned how to use a drill. She goes, now I know how to use the drill. So that's the attitude, man. That's the attitude that was like, you know, back in the day, the old school, that's what it was about. Like work ethic, no sense of entitlement. Today, I mean, I still see some gems like among the younger folks that have that right mindset, but a lot of them are just like, man, I just wonder, like, where are they going to end up, you know, when they feel like it should come easy? Nothing great can come easy. That's just like a fact of life. I feel like I'm doing like
That's
sermons here.
it's a great point, and they are the realities though. Nothing nothing beats hard work and just the willingness to grow and the energy you put in.
Yeah,
Um,
hard work, but like fun, you know? I mean, this is music,
yeah,
right? So like smile and have fun with it and be inspiring. Just be a blast of positive energy
and
to
that's a good
people
point
around you.
because if you're trying to work with people, you got to be someone that's pleasant to work with. Um, that's really important because they're gonna have to see you, and if they don't like seeing you, it doesn't really matter how good you are.
That's right.
Like, I mean, unless you're the best, but I mean, like,
No, I would tell you that
it's pretty fun.
personally, I choose not to work with composers who are genius, but whose attitude might not be something that I enjoy being around.
Mhm.
And that's my personal choice who I get to invite into my kitchen. So I just prefer to be, because I am a sensitive person and I tend to get um, stressed out when things aren't going well. I'm probably much better than like an average person because I've been, it's like years of being in this business. So you learn. But basically, the way I manage myself and my environment is that I only invite people who are extremely resilient and positive when things get challenging. And in our business, there have been campaigns where I wrote 7, 8 songs, 9 songs, and they're like, "Okay, thanks, Tommy. Can we have a call tomorrow morning?" Then we have a call, and it's like, you know what? We didn't like any of them, so we're just gonna like open up the pitch to other music production companies. And I'm sorry to tell you that, but like, yeah, you're gonna have one more chance, but we're gonna invite 2 other music production companies to try too, you know. And then you get through something like that where you actually win the job back, which was supposed to be yours in the first place. But you can imagine in a moment like that, you really want people around you who are, yeah, close to you, who are professional and who have a good attitude. Sorry, I got like, they're coming to get me.
Oh,
That's a good way to end the.
yeah. We've gone much longer than you kind of promised, and I do appreciate that
Yeah,
very
no worries,
much.
man. I just hope that
You're dropping the knowledge.
I just hope that some folks found it inspiring and yeah, it was helpful in some way.
Yeah,
Definitely did.
for me, it definitely was. Really appreciate it.
Right
And
on. Thank you for inviting
everyone
me,
here
man.
stuck around, so that's good. So we should let people know once again to head to Making Music for Brands to check out your site, your work, um,
Yeah, if you want to
and
check out
even
my
just
work, go to tommyz.co, tommyz.co, and if you want the mentorship masterclass stuff, go to Making Music for Brands, and those are the 2 places.
I'm gonna put those links in the YouTube chat. I've been dropping links in the YouTube chat in case people haven't noticed. Like some of the plugins you mentioned, um, some of them are great. Like you said, Spitfires Labs are incredible and free.
Yeah,
Um,
one tip that I want to give people as far as like my recent discovery is, and this is what Genevieve brought me onto during our interview, is the Unfinished. Look up synth patches by this guy called the Unfinished. He's doing some incredible work creating like these film scoring patches for every synth imaginable, from Diva to Omnisphere to Serum. But Genevieve told me about him, and yeah, I looked him up, and some incredible work. So that's like a recent discovery of mine, which is if you want to get into scoring for picture or film, incredible stuff, really cool stuff.
Nice. Found
Yeah,
it. Put it in the YouTube chat.
yeah, man. I don't know the guy. I have no business, promoting him, but I think he's doing great work, and so yeah, look him up, check it out, and like I said, your stuff, I downloaded a bunch of your stuff recently and I just started jamming on it. I made some really cool stuff. I should share it with you.
Oh, please do.
It's on my laptop though. It's not on my studio computer because I do it at home when I'm just on my headphones, just jamming.
Oh, that's awesome. I'd love to hear what you do with it. Like I said,
Yeah.
I hear very little about where my stuff goes. So it'd be great
Yeah,
to
I'll,
know.
I'll pull up that session and it's like nothing finished, but it's like, just those exercises that I do, like I said before, to decompress at the end of a long day of making music for somebody else.
That's pretty cool. Glad to help with that.
Yeah, man. Looks like your camera is blinking.
It
You should-
is. It's gonna die.
All right, man.
So yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everyone in the chat on YouTube. Thanks to David, Luke, Paul, Randall, and what happened to Brett? He disappeared.
Yeah, he
Um,
gave us a peace out.
Oh, did he? Okay, cool. But yeah, Tommy, thanks so much. This was really awesome. I learned a ton, and
Thanks for having me, Brian.
always enjoy speaking with you and hearing your perspective on things.
Thank you for having me, man. Really appreciate to chat with you again. It's wonderful every time.
Thanks. And I guess we will all sign off. I'm going to end the stream now. So take care.